and it can correct 1 out of every 3 perfectly.
Okay, all right.
Unless you get 2 errors, then it's going to correct it wrongly.
So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Cool Code Consortium Week 5. We got some nice stuff on the agenda for this week. So first I'll talk a little bit about announcements, then the poll. We'll do cool news. Walt has some good stuff for us. And then Travis is going to talk about some Node.js. We'll talk about next week, and then poll results at the very end. So here we go. So announcements, these have been the same for the last couple of weeks. Make sure you check out the GitHub repo for slides and demo code. We also have a YouTube channel for people who weren't able to make the meetings, or if you were able to make the meeting and you want to watch or get the content again, we've got the YouTube channel for that. Or if you want to send this to other people and make us go viral, I suppose that's okay too. But yeah,
send it to Linus.
Yeah, send it to Linus. There you go. All right, with that, I suppose we will move on to cool news. So I'll give this to Walt once I pull up his links. So whichever one. Yeah, I think first.
So I was going to talk about Prime Day and the bug and the strikes, but then I decided I only wanted to go a little bit political instead of very political. So here's going a little bit political. Microsoft has actually begun lobbying to the US government to regulate facial recognition, which is kind of unusual for a large tech company. They're usually sort of anti-regulation, particularly on new technologies like this. So this is a pretty big deal, but this is not like the dawn of pushes to regulate facial recognition. There have been things coming from like the FTC and I forget what the other group was. I've lost my notes, so I'm flying blind here. The ACLU have both pushed for this in the past, and for good reason. Like this picture you can see here, it's just a mock-up, but like Microsoft's facial recognition software has legitimately like they've been pushing for efforts to detect emotions in faces. There's 8 listed here, but generally psychology, you talk about the 6 basic emotions: anger, disgust, fear, surprise, happiness, sadness. A lot of these are being sold. Like, sure, these companies have these things internally, but they're also being sold to big companies. Like Microsoft has sold theirs to Uber. Amazon has sold theirs to, I don't remember the specific one, but both of them have sold previously this software to law enforcement agencies. This is a big problem for a couple reasons. One of the biggest reasons is facial recognition software like this often acquires biases. It's generally based on machine learning, so you could say, oh, well, if it's acquired a bias, it's just coming from the truth. But often what happens is either incidentally or through the data that's available, or intentionally, not in like a malicious way, but just in a personal perception way, whoever is choosing the training sets for these neural networks can introduce this bias. And because you can't like look at the code, like it's a neural network, you can't look at the code and be like, oh, hey, this law enforcement neural net says that Black people are more likely to be criminals. It's a neural net. There's no like line of code that says, that's like specifically reading something like that. It's hard to know about these things for sure. So perhaps it's good that these regulations are being pushed. But the shocker here is this has been going on for a lot longer than you might think. The other article I have linked here is an FTC press release from 2012 urging companies to safely use facial recognition technologies. That's 6 years ago. Your scrolling is backwards because it's a Mac. Particularly this quote here. Direct quote from the FTC report. The commercial use of facial recognition technologies is still young. This creates a unique opportunity to ensure that as this industry grows, it does so in a way that respects the privacy interests of consumers while preserving the beneficial uses of the technology has to offer. Well, shit, that hasn't happened. There's a lot more in this press release. I'd say the Times article is kind of a primer on this. The press release actually like hits some interesting points, and its premonition is frightening at some points. I think it's a great read. The FTC thing is particularly short. Without my notes, that's all that I have as far as talking points, though. So,
cool. Thanks, Walt. Yeah, I'll make sure I send these links out in general. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and move on to our main topic.
Great. So I unmute myself on Hangouts.
Yeah, so let me mute myself.
You go ahead and unmute. Hello. I am talking.
Yeah, and then go ahead and share your screen.
On Hangouts.
Make sure you.
Do I have to go back into my display stuff and do that? Or?
Let's see.
Sorry, I'm very unprepared.
Let's come back. Oh, it's this guy here. Here, play to that. And then that should extend. There we go.
All right, cool.
So make sure you just close out of your setting. Okay, yeah.
We good?
Let's just make sure, go back to the Hangouts window. Okay. And then yeah, I can do that. Let's come back to the Hangouts window and make sure we share the second monitor. Share screen. And that should do it.
All right, we all good?
Yeah, we're good. Go ahead.
We're all good?
Yep.
All right. Get my PowerPoint open here. Hit play. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining. This is Node.js, or how I learned to stop worrying and love nested callbacks. We're going to get a little weird with it. We're going to be informative. We're going to have fun. If anybody has any questions or comments or gets a little nervous, just let me know and we'll work through it together. So a lot of people, when they start talking about the history of the internet, you might start talking in the 90s, right? Or maybe the 80s. You can start talking about you can go back as far as you want. So I went back to the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, right? So the whole universe at this point was very like hot and gassy. There weren't any callbacks or it was a lot of just gassy matter. Before the Big Bang, I don't know. You'll have to consult the religious for that one, but I don't know. So at this time, you had things that started expanding. So you had sort of elements, and those elements would actually create new elements through the neutron stars, and eventually we got humans, right? And that's us. So I'm going to run you through real quick the top 3 inventions by humans. Does anybody have any guesses?
Electricity.
The wheel and the fire. None of those are correct.
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. Air conditioning is number 4. Sliced bread is number 5. So, any other guesses before we actually reveal the top 3 inventions by humans?
Computers.
Excessively nested callbacks.
Oh, we'll get there. All right. Number 1 is the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg invented the movable metal type, so it was a lot easier to print books, and this helped expand literacy. This was an obvious choice. I can't believe you guys didn't pick this one, but so that was really important, and it helped people read the Bible for themselves, and you got all kinds of revolutions and stuff because of that. Number 2 is holes.
like the book or like the concept?
No, the movie, the 2003 movie. It was directed by Andrew Davis. You might have seen it running a lot on Disney Channel. It was really important for me, so I don't know. It was really innovative. And the number 3, this order is fine. So the third most important, I think I was supposed to do this 3, 2, 1, because this one is the most important, and it's JavaScript. So this was the I guess third, whatever. It's all a joke anyway. So so JavaScript. So the origin of JavaScript. So Netscape, which is one of the early web browsers, wanted to make content more dynamic, right? Because around 1995, you just had a bunch of HTML tables, and you had to meticulously lay out your content, and you couldn't, have spam pop-ups or anything cool like that JavaScript now allows us to do. So they hired Brandon Ike to figure it out. I understand you guys have met him or something, so he's talked to your school. They only have like homeless people talking in my school, so
We got those too.
okay. They give art, whatever. So in May of 1995, in 10 days' time, he came up with a prototype for this new language, and he called it Mocha. So Mocha was the original name for JavaScript, and this would allow front-end scripting, right? So you could grab elements from HTML and you could do fun stuff with them, and this allowed the web to be a lot more dynamic. And within just a couple of years, most every major browser had JavaScript built in, right? It's dynamic, weakly typed, and that leads to a lot of issues that a lot of people will call out JavaScript for. Is there's a lot of weird behavior surrounding it, and it's the predominant front-end scripting language for the web. This next photo is actually they had a photograph of Brandon Ike discovering JavaScript, and I actually colorized it for you guys. So here's that. Connor was actually there when they invented JavaScript. So that's Brandon Ike on top of Mount Sinai receiving JavaScript from the heavens. So 1300 BC. No, it was actually 1995. Let's see. Important note about JavaScript. JavaScript is very dependent on its environment. So, if JavaScript is traditionally has traditionally been a front-end scripting language. So you're going to use JavaScript for manipulating DOM elements, right? A lot of JavaScript's behavior and its initial design were based around this concept. So if you were, for some radical reason, to try to write server-side JavaScript, right? Its behavior is going to be very different. It's going to be very dependent on that environment instead. And your use of it's going to be very different. So a JavaScript file for the server side will in a lot of ways look like the front-end JavaScript that you're maybe more used to, but it's just an important note that JavaScript is dependent on its environment. So a lot of people might criticize JavaScript as a back-end choice, and that might be somewhat for good reason, just because it's traditionally, for manipulating elements on a web page and stuff like that. So important thing to keep in mind. And this is just in case anyone's unfamiliar or skipped class or whatever. This is the core web stack. So just about every website on the internet, right, is using JavaScript, CSS, HTML. HTML is just your basic structure, right? Your text and stuff like that. Your images, bare bones. CSS is the pretty stuff, makes it look nice, and JavaScript is your behavior, right? And most web frameworks you see are just sort of abstractions of this. So like Bootstrap is a sort of a CSS framework. It's just written with Bootstrap, right? Like you can do anything with these frameworks. So it's pretty much just these three core technologies. You can make pretty much any website that's on the internet, just about. So it's in terms of front end, at least, kind of money. Anyway, so that's the core web stack. In case you were unfamiliar, PHP sucks. PHP is it was developed in 1995, and it's the most widely used server-side scripting language, right? So this is what's been used for a long time. Websites like Facebook were built on this. A lot of people say the whole internet's built on PHP, right? I don't like it. It sort of encourages mixing your business logic with your presentation code, which is kind of an issue. Like you might disagree, and you could design PHP to sort of get around this, but I sort of see it, and a lot of people sort of see it as by PHP's design, you're actually encouraging people, to have logic like talking to a database or something, and then in that same sort of code block or of functionality, it's not modular, really. You're not dividing responsibility properly the way PHP is typically written. So you're actually just combining a lot of front-end and back-end logic in a way that's kind of messy. A lot of people have problems with operators, ternary operators, unconventional, misleading syntax. And it wasn't really designed to scale. So when PHP was developed, it was for very simple websites, right? You've all probably done like a little connect to MySQL, echo a table to the page, right? And if that's all you've ever written in PHP, then that's awesome. But its design is very arguably not made to scale, right? So PHP sucks. So what else can we use, right? Pretty much anything. Alternatives for server-side scripting, you can pretty much, your favorite language probably has some way to have a server-side environment, right? Java does it. A lot of people like Python with like Django and Flask and stuff for web development. That's a very trendy one. Perl and Ruby are kind of conventional choices. You could even do C or C++ if you wanted. Really anything you want, you could do server-side scripting. But what's that big question mark right there? What could it be? That's right. It's everyone's favorite language, JavaScript. Ooh. Right. So what if we could write JavaScript server-side code, right? So that was the idea behind Node.js. So Node.js is a JavaScript runtime environment outside the browser, right? So it was released in 2009. That's Ryan Dahl. He's an interesting guy. Created Node.js. He does a lot of like talks and things. So if you're interested, he does like Reddit AMAs. And you can, there's like a whole video. It's like a 2-hour video on YouTube of him talking into his webcam, like explaining the history of Node.js, which is kind of interesting. So 13 years after JavaScript's first client-side runtime environment, this came out. And he didn't like that Apache, HTTP, and other servers at the time couldn't handle a lot of connections at once, right? So that's sort of the idea behind Node's event loop and the amount of blocking code. So obviously, if you're unfamiliar, JavaScript is for a lot of things is asynchronous, right? So you can things can return things and other things can get done before the return of the thing before whenever. Asynchronous, right? Code doesn't block other code. Somewhat, for certain things like requests and things like that. JavaScript's not going to wait for a request to return something; it'll just keep going. There's a fair argument to be made that this could actually be really helpful for a server. So that's kind of the idea behind Node.js. And here are some benefits. Speed in some ways, right? Node.js uses a single thread. It's called the event loop. And I'll actually show you that here. So all the processing is done asynchronously. So on different sort of server-side environments, you might have different threads, right? And they're all responsible for different things. And you can maintain those threads. And there's sort of ways to kind of make those behave similar to Node.js, right? But the idea is this event loop, right? It's a single thread. You send things to it, and it's always just asynchronously doing everything that it gets and sending things right through this one loop. So you can, right here, you can make requests, and then it can hit some thing where intensive operation is done, a file system database, whatever, and you can get, and that'll get thrown back into the event loop, and you can trigger callbacks and things like that. Does anybody have any questions so far or anything? Or we keep going? Cool. Other benefits, one language across the stack is a big selling point for Node.js, right? JavaScript everywhere is like a kind of a paradigm you might see. So if you hear JavaScript everywhere, that just means somebody only knows one programming language, but they want to be a web developer. And that's me. No. So there's sort of a convenience. You can transfer JSON between your backend and your front end pretty seamlessly if your whole stack is one language between client and server.
Can you real quick JSON?
Yeah, it's the object type that is most commonly used with JavaScript. JavaScript does technically support object-oriented programming now. It's just syntactic sugar, but you can define classes and things since like 2013 or something. But typically, JavaScript has a very simple object, and it's JSON objects, right? So you
JSON JavaScript object.
right. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, that's what it stands for. If you're into acronyms. So JSON objects are a very simple data type, right? And a lot of people might criticize JavaScript for that. But if you're dealing with that and your client is mostly dealing with JSON objects, right? You snatch from a database. You're not dealing with a results set or anything. You're just putting stuff right into a JSON object, sending that to your front end. And the front end typically can handle JSON very well because of JavaScript, right? So using one language across the stack is a big benefit of having Node in your stack, and then JavaScript doing your front end stuff. A lot of companies that use Node.js have actually talked about sort of merging their back end and front end teams, and kind of the idea of back end and front end is like a little. Of course, they're still separate, and you want your code to be separate, but they're just getting a little more nebulous, right? PayPal was one example that I read about. PayPal sort of apparently built some new system or something using Node that replaced the old one with like half the team size and like half the time or something, just because they claimed it was very efficient to do the whole thing in JavaScript, right? Keeps your project a lot simpler, right? And there's sort of a convenience to that. Node is efficient with I/O tasks, so a lot of inputs and outputs. Like I said, on that event loop, it can handle those pretty well. And we'll talk about things that Node isn't as good for. But NPM is something I love, and I was talking to Connor about this earlier today. Like, you can really, for the majority of projects that we're building, right? You can pretty much use any server side thing you want. I'm not going to tell you Node is like, a lot like so fast that you need it, right? But the Node package manager is really a selling point for me. And I think if you played around with it, you would see that there is a module for just about anything, right? And there's actually caused a lot of division in the Node.js community about this Node package manager. And the guy who actually started up NPM, actually took over running Node for a while, like running the whole Node project. And there's sort of a division in the community over how, I guess, kind of open, nodes should be to things like this and developer input, and that has actually caused like a schism for a while where two people were like claiming that they ran Node.js or they were like behind it, but they eventually consolidated into the Node Foundation or whatever. Interesting stuff if you care about that.
I get one real quick.
Sure.
So like you mentioned that it's really easy to use, and you may touch on this a little bit.
Yeah.
But like, how much effort is it really to create a Node module and put it on NPM?
To create a module, it's really easy. It's just you can just have a JavaScript file that has like a function, right? You just write you just write a JavaScript file, export function, blah blah blah, and then I'll show you how to require those, and kind of how, and I'll tell you about NPM a little bit more. So it's it's also dependency management, right? Node.js has one file in your project called package.json, and that just keeps track of all your dependencies. And then every time you run npm install, you would typically git ignore that if you're using Git or something. Or you would git ignore your modules themselves. You would keep that package file, right? And then you just do npm install, boom, npm installs all your dependencies for you, all your packages. Super easy, takes like 2 seconds. And it's very easy to pull those into your code as well, right? So it's very simple. And there are Node modules for just about anything you can think of. Let's see if I have some of these popular ones here. Yeah. Express is a common one that you'll see. It is pretty much to spin up a server, right? So if you've heard of the mean stack, that's a very popular web stack that people will put on their resumes or whatever now. It's MongoDB and Express, AngularJS for the front end, right? And then Node kind of on the client side running, keeping all this kind of going. So Express is really nice. It's really, really lightweight. It's a really fast, minimal web server framework, right? So you just require this. It's a one-liner. I actually have a snippet of code that I'll show you on how to do this in a second, but super easy. Pug is really cool. It's formerly called Jade, but then like the website Jade, whoever owns like a software company called Jade, like sued them, even though like nobody, I don't know, it was like a lot smaller company, but they technically had the trademark. So legal issues. So now we have this cute Pug JS, right? So Pug is a templating engine. And it'll spit out HTML, right? And the way you write Pug is it looks a lot like HTML, but it's without the brackets, and white space matters. So that's pretty much the only difference. So I think it looks a lot cleaner. I think it's kind of a smoother way to write your HTML. And then and you can also sort of render, because it's a templating engine, right? You can render these Pug files. You can render your front end from these Pug files, and you can pass in data on your client side. So you can be like, hey, Pug, render this page using this this template that just kind of looks like HTML, but also has these variables, right? So you pass in your backend data. Super easy. Sort of replaces like PHP, kind of encouraging you to do a lot of that together, right? So Pug is just your front end, and Pug will only know about the variables that it gets because it's a templating engine, right? And you can pass that in client side. You guys know how to write clean code and stuff. So, and it's pretty simple templating and getting data from your backend to your front end. And then MongoDB is very popular. We talked about that. It's a database, right? But the wrapper for it is used a lot. And all major databases have some kind of, well-functioning, well-documented, well-maintained module for the database, right? So if you wanted to connect to a Mongo instance on a Node environment, it'd be really easy. You just do Mongo equals require Mongo, you npm install it, and then you can pretty much just do like mongo.settings is this, then mongo.query, whatever. So it's super easy to use. And Node.js is actually getting pretty popular with NoSQL just in general. People like to use NoSQL with with Node. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And here's an example. Really simple request server. That's just 4 lines, right? You typically have those line breaks in there, but constant express. So that's just, JavaScript supports constant. So constant express equals require express. So if you have express installed, all you do is require it. And then that one line at the top tells it, hey, I want to use express in this file, right? And it also creates a variable that has the functionality in it. It's just a one-liner, super simple. So you say, hey, request is give me express, right? Or yeah, express is give me express. And then you can create an app from that. It's typically called app. And then that's an endpoint right there. So you just go to localhost, right, /3000/ whatever, hello world. And you can have those callbacks, right? That's what those arrow functions are. If you don't know, a callback is just a function that you give, hey, when this is done, then go to this function and execute that, or you can pass data back to a callback. So arrow functions just say, hey, once someone goes to that endpoint, send hello world. Right? Very simple, 4 lines. I use Express for like my web projects. It just makes it really easy. So pretty cool stuff. Any questions about NPM or Express or anything like that? Yeah. I just encourage you to play around with it if you're interested. It's really cool stuff, in my opinion. So, companies that use Node.js regularly. Microsoft, PayPal, Walmart. Movie Match is my personal project. I thought I'd put it up there just as a promo. I thought Connor would get a giggle. Like I said, PayPal had that whole thing where they're like, oh, we got to cut our team down when building the project because it was simpler or whatever. Netflix has praised it for its speed and handling a lot of events, right? Walmart, Microsoft, LinkedIn, whatever. A lot of big companies use Node. I'm sort of haven't looked into like exactly how much. I'm skeptical that a lot of super big projects at a lot of big companies are on Node just because it's still fairly new. These companies want to rely on mature technologies and have engineers that have worked with, old stuff. But I think in the next 10 years, you'll definitely see it used more and more. I don't think it's dying out anytime soon, right? As a way to do your backend. And I think that event loop is really like a unique thing that keeps people coming back to it. So reasons you might not use Node.js if you're a loser. No. So there's common JavaScript complaints, right? JavaScript is weakly typed. And there's a lot of strange language features. If you've ever seen those memes where it's like, empty array, triple equal sign, empty array is false. Like what? JavaScript, that's weird, right? JavaScript is like sort of strangely designed in a lot of ways. So if you like don't like it and you're one of those people that just hates on JavaScript, then don't use Node.js. Pretty obvious. And then there's issues with requests, right? And the sort of asynchronicity of it. So if you want things to happen synchronously, you have to use callbacks in a smart way, and so that data is being passed so that X can happen before Y happens, right? And if you write really long, maybe like an express route or something that has a lot of logic in it, you want a lot of callbacks, nested callbacks, right? You're going to end up with callback hell, which looks like this. Yeah. So you have these functions, and then something you pass in as the last parameter is another function, right? And you can see how you can nest these things, and it can look very ugly.
For listener purposes.
Yeah, I just Googled callback hell. I don't even know if this is Node, but and it looks like I'm gonna have some time, so I thought about showing you guys just like one of my projects a little bit, just the code of it a little bit, and you'll see that I definitely have some really ugly callback hell going on that I need to fix. So if you are interested in doing Node and you want to avoid callback hell, you want to be sure you give all your functions names, right? And you want to modularize as much as possible. So instead of doing like that and then function and then defining the function, as much as you can, you want to split those out and define that function elsewhere and then place it in. It actually, in my opinion, it can be kind of more readable this way. But once you get so nested with your callbacks, it's pretty ugly, right? You can imagine, and it's not even this clean where it's all the same function over and over. It's a lot of ugly stuff. It's hard to keep track of your data. So in a way, like I said, I think it is kind of readable because you can see, oh, boom, this, and you sort of see what chunks are dependent on other chunks of code, right? But at the end of the day, you don't want your code looking like this. And I'll show you some of my code that looks exactly like this, and it's much worse. So in the spirit of education. Relational databases, a lot of people criticize Node's handling of relational databases. I've never had a problem with it. I read some article sort of in preparation for this that said like, never ever use Node if you want to use SQL. Like, just use PHP or something. And I think that my opinion is that that's just kind of rooted in that relational databases are typically associated with things like PHP that are just more traditional framework, client side ways of doing things. So a lot of people, and my thought is just because they've sort of come to popularity at the same time, is that a lot of NoSQL has sort of been coupled with Node just because they sort of rose to popularity at the same time, and maybe people sort of made them compatible with each other really well. So you will see a lot of really, really well supported Node modules for MongoDB and for Redis and other like kind of interesting, newer, trendier type databases. And you might see people say, oh, it doesn't support SQL well. I have never had issues with it. I use SQL for like some of my projects, Node projects, and there's a really simple to use SQL module. It's really easy to make requests. I have not seen any like major differences between that and Mongo. Maybe if you really got into the guts of some interesting query stuff, or interesting SQL stuff like features, stuff might not be supported as well. You have to play with that on your own. But that is something that people will say, so I thought I'd throw it up here. If you're using a relational database, and that's like really pivotal to you, that you have all the features of that database, maybe just make sure that the module you want to use supports a lot of the stuff that you want to do, right? You just want to check that stuff out before you commit to using Node. Because a lot of these modules are user-defined, right? They're just some dude's GitHub project, and while a lot of them are really cool, they are just some dude's GitHub project. So, and then large processing jobs, and that typically means like sort of CPU-intensive type things. So like Node.js is sort of intended for a lot of small things that you can do quickly, throw them in and out of that event loop, right? You don't want to you don't want to tell the event loop to calculate Fibonacci numbers or whatever, so you want to have a lot of in and out of that loop. So a lot of small things. So like requests that you can quickly snatch something, right, and do something with it. That's the kind of stuff that I think Node is cool for. But if you have something that's going to block up that event thread and take up a lot of its computation, maybe think about using something else. So just call back hell again. Some conclusions. Node.js is a fast, convenient way to run your favorite language, which is JavaScript, outside of the browser. This is something else I just want to point out. Is I've kind of touched on this already. The Node community is really big. So there's a module for anything you need. And if you just want to like prototype some stuff, Node is really quick, and it's really you can do things in very few lines of code. Like I said, that callback hell stuff and kind of the way JavaScript is designed, it can be hard to maintain large projects. Like if you were doing your server side in some kind of Java-based framework, right? We've sort of had a lot more experience, and it's like kind of maybe a lot easier because of Java's design to manage large projects. So maybe for like a long-term thing, like you might initially think that like a Java or whatever, Python, whatever, is the way to do like a large web project. But JavaScript, I think it's simple enough to where you can, if you're careful with how you design things, you can also do a pretty large scalable project with Node as well. Just be careful how you design, right? It's what I was getting at. JavaScript can be deceptively forgiving. A lot of it's simple. JSON's kind of easy to use. Oh, that's questions. That's Brandon Ike today, as you guys might know him.
I think that's from his TED.
Oh, really? Yeah. So I was just going to brush through one of my repos real quick, but if anybody has any questions about like Node or anything, we can do that now.
Any questions?
Sure.
Promises?
Yeah, you can use promises.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like that, from my experience with JavaScript, that seems to be the easiest and nicest way of callback hell is promises.
Well, promises they can still sort of end up looking like callback hell, right?
True, but at the very least, you don't have Ryu over there doing Hadouken to push it to the right. It's at the very least all nice and lined up. And so,
well, sure. I mean, but like you can write your callbacks, like I said, name them and put them elsewhere in a way that also looks, I guess, sort of comparable to promises. But yeah, promises is a nice way to do it. If you don't know what promise is, when you say you sort of promise some completion component of some process. So you say like this, and then when it's done, do this. So
I think some languages support futures as well. It's
similar concept, yeah. Yeah.
Continuations.
Or continuation.
Yeah. Any other questions or anything? Cool. So I'm just gonna pull up one of my repos here. This is like kind of, I don't know, just my thing I've been working on like lately. It's like it's just an application that has, it's like a social media type thing where you can rate movies. And then it keeps track of, accounts and your ratings and things in a simple like SQL database. And wonder if I can like push that over there. And yeah, sure. It's kind of blurry, but
just do Control plus. Make the whole.
Yeah, so blurry. Yeah, I was just gonna poke through this. I can maybe run this. If you go, I don't know if it's stable right now. I can maybe run this. So up here, it's pretty conventional just to have all your node modules up top, right? And those are typically going to be constants. These should be constants. I don't know why they're vars. So you have, Express here, SQL. That's stuff for doing, making work with your paths easier, right? For file I/O type stuff. Body parse. There's a lot of this stuff you could just do in simple JavaScript, but a very common thing in Node is just, hey, if there's a module for it, it's really quick just to grab it and then have it do some work for me. So just for parsing response bodies or whatever. Sessions handled really easily with Express session. It's for interacting with your file system. Request promise. So this is kind of what you're getting at is it'll do a request and then kind of just really simply have a promise associated with that for you, right? Favicons for your icons to type your pages, and then that's my hashing and salting type stuff. So you can have, your constants up here. There's different sort of methodologies. Node is still, within 10 years old. So there are sort of design recommendations you can make. And I probably should split a lot of these out into different files, but for smaller-ish projects, having one index.js is actually just pretty common. But you can split a lot of this out, of course, if you want to make it look cleaner.
So that actually was my question. How would you split a node project into many factors?
You would typically do it through functions. So you could have like your routes. You could do like app.get this is like you could put those elsewhere, right? So you can have a thing for your route. And JavaScript makes it really easy to export objects or functions to other files. You can just do like module.exports and then.
So yeah, just like he's used the require function up at the top for all of his npm installed modules, he could create his own local modules, local files essentially, and just require them into one
Sure.
world.
Yeah, it's actually really, if you had like another JSON file that was like in the same directory or whatever, you could do like for my JSON equals require, and then you could actually just put where the JSON is. So you could just do my file dot or whatever, whole dot JSON, and then
require data files. That's interesting.
what was that?
I didn't know you could require data files. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's the exact same keyword, so it'll just grab it. Really handy.
Why are you using var instead of let?
Well, for your modules, that code's not gonna. You don't want to mess with those, so you would want those to be constants, right? Because you're just grabbing functionality from them. But yeah, a lot of this is still just sort of like me hacking away. So like a lot of this definitely is not best practice type stuff yet. These, like I said, should be constants. I think I just grabbed these from like Stack Overflow and never changed them to constants. But you would want to do that. Right.
It depends whether you value them being guaranteed constant more or supporting pre-ES6 more.
Oh,
because constant is ES6.
Well, yeah, but typically this is run in a node environment that you have somewhere.
Yeah.
So like you're not worried about. It's not like with your browser. That's actually a good point. Where you're worried about Internet Explorer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can pretty much assume that
people are using the latest version.
Well, wherever you're hosting your node environment is going to support ES6 or is going to support ES6. So that's actually a really interesting point. Is that you don't have to worry as much about sort of browser touch and go type things that you typically do with JavaScript, because you can be pretty confident about where this code is going to be run, because it's going to be run where you put it, and that's on Docker, right, Connor?
That's right.
No, but Docker actually does make it really easy to Dockerize a node project. I've done it. I never used Docker before, and it took like 10 minutes. It's really easy.
One quick thing, can you show a pug file?
Oh, sure. I was going to do that for sure. So this is a pug file. It looks like HTML, right? But the only thing that's different is instead of brackets, you have these dots, right? Or you don't have dots. You just have nothing. You don't have brackets at all. So like this. Divs themselves, Pug decided that. Let's see if I have one here. Yeah, Pug decided that divs are so common you don't even have to write div. You can just do a dot.
Triggered.
So you can write div and it'll work, but it's common pug practice just to do dot, well, dot is class, right? So you just do dot drop down menu and that creates a div with that class, right? So pretty cool. White space does matter. And one thing that is annoying is you have to pick tabs or spaces. If you mix and match, Pug will yell at you because, of course, white space matters. So it has to know like sort of how it's hierarching things. So if you, a lot of times it's really easy. You can do I won't pull it up, but there's just like, you can just go to Google and do HTML to Pug, or you might have to say Jade, converter, the HTML to Pug, whatever. And you just like literally put in a block of HTML and it'll convert it to Pug for you. I've never had any problems with that not working. The only thing is that it might default to using tabs or spaces, and I use tabs, so whatever. You just got to be careful of that stuff. But yeah, pretty slick, I think. You have, and I'm using Bootstrap, so anything you can do on an HTML page, you can just do it here. It literally just spits out HTML when it's done. So these are just Bootstrap grid type stuff. If you know Bootstrap, you're probably familiar with it. And then these are like variables. So in like, so you would pass these in your index file. So like when you're rendering, there's some callback hell for you. So when you're rendering your Pug page, I think there's some that gets worse for sure. Let's see if I can find like a render. Yeah. So like this is really easy. So like it's your login page, and and I can pass in failed login, right? So here I'm just saying like, hey, if they tried to log in previously and it failed, render this page with this new thing with this new parameter, right? Failed login. And then I can pass in true or false, right? There's probably a slicker way to do this than these ifs, whatever. But you can do, and then like in Pug, you just use that as a variable, really simple. And you can also do like JavaScript type things. So you can do a dash means do some JavaScript. So in Pug, you can do dash and then a for loop and then write some HTML tags if you just want to spit out a bunch of, or then write, some Pug HTML, whatever, below that. So if you want to auto-generate 1,000 table rows in Pug, you just do a little for loop, and then you can do actual like HTML looking code below, if that makes sense. I hope this isn't confusing. Like I use this a lot, so for me it makes sense. But is there anything I'm not being clear about or anything? Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's pretty simple type stuff.
This editing environment that you're using, talk about
that. This is Visual Studio Code. It's very, very lightweight. It's run by Microsoft, right? I mean, not much to say about it. It doesn't support. It's one of those another one of those things that like users can write a lot of their own plugins for it and stuff. So if you have some weird language that you want your syntax highlighted for, there's probably a VS Code plugin for it. I mean, it's very like lightweight by default, and then I think the idea is that you can beef it up with whatever you want. So I like it. I think it looks pretty slick. Keeps track of my files. Has Git integration, like some GUI stuff with Git. So you add Docker to what?
Docker I think if you download Docker on your computer.
That's neat. I didn't know that because I had no idea that was there until you said that.
I was just like, that looks like
yeah.
It's just a whale. I mean, why would you notice it?
Yeah, I mean that's all I've got. Unless you guys have any questions, and if you wanted to run this, you would just do, like I said, I'm not totally sure if this is like stable or whatever right now, but you would just do. Yeah, I guess so. I'll see if I can pull this up just for promoting myself. Let's see if I can pull a window over here.
This is how you're going to become rich and famous.
I'm starting right here at the Cool Code Consortium, plugging my shitty or my dumb Node app. I always forget I'm not supposed to cuss on this. You got a localhost 3000, and you can do like.
Are we trying to keep this clean? I'm pretty sure it's swollen to say quarters.
So this is just like it's just very like it's a simple little web page, right? Using Bootstrap and stuff. Password 123. And it's just simple little website. Keeps track of movies and movies, and I have an API that I hit to get all the movie data, so I'm not storing any actual movie data. It's just like I'm hitting an API. So Node is really good for that. Like I said, if you want to hit an API a bunch of times in your website, it's pretty fast, right? So yeah, that's what I got. Any other questions before we toss it back to Connor? Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Thanks. That's awesome. One. All right. Oh, cool. Let's. All right. Real quick note. If you haven't voted in the polls, I think I forgot to mention it earlier. Make sure you vote in the polls. Yeah, those are just in general. Let's see if we can get back. All right, let's move this guy out. That's what I'm missing. Okay, that was, we did cool news, Node.js. Okay, next week. I think Lewis has our main topic, kind of TBD on what exactly that's going to be, but you can probably guarantee that there's going to be some Linux in there.
There is going to be the best SSH hack you've ever seen.
Yeah, so if you're interested in the best, that's right, the best SSH hack you've ever seen. Make sure you tune in next week.
Probably going to be C++, I think.
Oh, okay. And maybe some C++ stuff. So good stuff. Make sure you tune in next week. I do need somebody to do cool news. Anybody who's interested in doing cool news next week? Okay. So it doesn't take a long time to prepare, right?
That's true.
So basically, it's find an article or two that are, I think, at least tangentially related to software. I think that's the criteria. So not too difficult there. So okay, I guess with that, it's time for poll results. So the question this week was, what is your least favorite sorting algorithm? We had so many responses to this poll, we had to create an overflow poll. So it looks like currently in the lead for what is your least favorite sorting algorithm? We have number 9 in the first poll, letting the heavier data settle out to the bottom of the array. So there you go. That is overall the least favorite sorting algorithm. So
it actually reminds me of a very bizarre sorting algorithm called sleep sort, where it only works if you have numerical data. You effectively create a buffer and you map each thing in your data to be sorted to a function that sleeps for the value of the data and then echoes it into the new buffer.
well, there you go. Sleep sort.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you go. The more you know. All right. Any other things before we close? All right. Cool. Thanks, guys.